Hello, and welcome to the SMU Video Archive series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. I'm Neil McFarland, and today we have with us Dr. Harold Jeske. Dr. Jeske is a retired professor of chemistry. It will embarrass him for me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. He is among the most respected and effective teachers in the history of Southern Methodist University. Dr. Jeske, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And will you begin by telling us how and when you came to SMU?
I was invited out in September 1944 for an interview by Dr. Ogden Bain, who was chairman of the chemistry department. I spent about 3 days here and soon received an offer to join the faculty. And I actually became a member on January 1st, 1945. We arrived in Dallas on New Year's Eve, 44.
Yeah. Now, had you come from another teaching position, or were you in industry at the time?
I was at the Medical Health Center in Memphis, Tennessee, of the University of Tennessee. And Ogden knew me through my work at the medical school, where he was at the Southwestern University, now called Rhodes College, as head of the department.
I see.
And we met through the American Chemical Society meetings, which were monthly functions.
Do you have any particularly strong recollections of those first days here, periods here at SMU?
Yes. The chemistry department was housed in the basement of Atkins Hall.
Yeah.
And during my 5 years in the catacombs, I never took my wife down there to see the place. It was so discouraging. But President Lee assured me that chemistry would get a new building. At that time, they were talking about an addition to Higher Hall, but we had no ventilation.
It was a smelly place, wasn't
Yes,
it? I remember that.
Oh, certainly. You were a student there, no doubt.
Yes.
And Dr. Hughes was still here when I came, but he was no longer the head.
Yeah.
Ogden was the chairman. Small department, too.
Yeah.
I arrived, as I said, on New Year's Eve, but I was in the classroom to relieve Ogden on January the 2nd. He asked me by mail to take over a course, and relieve him of one course.
Now, as your work developed, you worked more and more with pre-med students, didn't you?
Yes, I taught organic chemistry, and every pre-med and pre-dent had to take organic, a year of organic.
Yes.
So Maine Longnecker, who was chairman of the pre-med committee, asked me to serve on the committee as soon as I joined the faculty. And it turned out to be one of my most enjoyable activities because the students were so good, diligent.
It was one of your more effective activities too, I think, because dentists and doctors around the country are still coming back to visit you and to thank you for what you contributed to their lives.
Well, thank you.
I've always admired the recollection that you have of your former students. I remember that you and your wife Marge, when you would take trips around the country, would always take with you the addresses and telephone numbers of former students and look them up.
We took the alumni directory. That's correct. It was fun.
Well, can you tell us something about some of those contacts, some of those former students that you cherish and who cherish you?
Well, one of my favorite boys was Tom Koenig, who was not only a great student but a great football player.
Yes.
And in 1967, we took our first real vacation, took off 6 weeks and toured the Canadian Pacific, the national parks. I spent a week with Tom and his family, my wife and I, in Oregon. He was a professor of chemistry at the University of Oregon, and we became good friends during his student days here. As a matter of fact, he was a major factor in getting me interested in the athletic program here, because he represented the best in student athletics,
Yes.
because he was really a student.
Yes.
But I've seen many over the years in our travels. On that trip, we saw people all the way down to from Oregon down to San Diego. I could remember Jim Cole was a urologist out there. Corson Lewis was a plastic surgeon. Let's see, Richard Bryant, who was a professor of medicine. Richard was also an athlete. He was captain of the basketball team in 1954. I still hear from him regularly. He checks on my health
Yeah.
by phone,
That's great.
but every 2 weeks. Trying to think of others. Oh, and in the New Orleans area, I had many also.
Yeah.
Some at College Station.
Right here in Dallas-Fort Worth area, too. You
Oh,
had
at the
quite-
medical school, yes. I read the directory one time, and we had 27 SMU graduates on the faculty of the medical school full-time.
SMU has a very good record, as a matter of fact, of getting pre-med and pre-dental students into the requisite schools.
We certainly did, and I think the foundation was laid by Dr. Longnecker, and he sort of trained first Joe Harris, who became a dean,
Yes.
and when Joe became a dean, I became the chairman, because Maine had already become a dean. And I think I was chairman about 17 years, till I retired.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was fun to work with those wonderful students. But we had a first-name relationship with the admissions officers at all the Texas schools and many other schools. Like, I was a graduate of Washington University in St. Louis. Whenever I went home to see my parents, I spent the day at the medical school.
Yeah.
And that didn't hurt anything.
It didn't hurt anything at all.
Because we could always send a top student to Washington University. Did so nearly every year, some years too.
Right.
And on my trips, I tried to visit the medical schools all over the country. And I had a close relationship with the admissions officers at places like Johns Hopkins, Duke. Tulane really liked our students. And we sent many of the out-of-state students to Tulane because they were not eligible for the University of Texas medical schools.
Yeah.
You have to be a state resident.
Right.
So Tulane was a wonderful place to send them.
Well, now, organic chemistry has the reputation of being one of the most difficult of all of the college courses, and here you emerge as a popular professor of organic chemistry. Can you explain that?
Well, it did have a sinister reputation, but I loved the course. It was my favorite course, so I put a lot of history in the course to try to make it more interesting. And tried to teach also a little of the philosophy of the science. I never mentioned an organic chemist without a little biographical sketch, historical. And the science is rich with what I used to call the old masters, starting about 1850, mainly in Germany, France, and England. So I think I included in the lectures more than organic chemistry.
Yes.
I hope I did. I tried to.
Well, I think it's obvious that you did, and there are many students who are the better for it and who respect you very much. I know that these students, as you have said previously, come back to see you frequently, but they also have found various ways to honor you, and I believe you have at least one endowed scholarship in your name, and that the new lecture hall in the science building is now under construction will be named for you. I know that you're somewhat embarrassed by this attention, but I think the rest of us would like to have more information as to how this goes.
I just don't, it's hard to understand how the boys did so much for me. I refer to them as boys, but I did have quite a few girls. But in my early years, it was rare for girls to go to medical school or to major in chemistry. But they've been so generous in supporting. I have an endowed chair. This scholarship that those boys set up has a cash value now over $1 million. And the income enables us to give about 5 scholarships a year.
Is that right?
Not full,
Yeah.
but maybe 2,000 to each student.
Enabling scholarships at any rate, yes.
Yes, it helps.
Mm-hmm. And then this new lecture hall that's under construction is to be named for you, I understand.
That's true.
I suppose that represents also some alumni contributions.
Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
It does, and that was well underway before I knew it, and of course it was embarrassing, but certainly appreciated.
Well, your humbleness is certainly impressive, but also the accomplishments that you've made here at the university are even more so. So I don't think you should feel embarrassed by what they're doing for you. The rest of us are grateful to them for what they're doing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I have to admit I never felt I was working for a living while I was on the staff. It was so much fun. I look forward to it every morning. Could hardly wait in the fall.
Well, now there's an approach that's fairly rare among university faculty, I think.
Well, I was basically a teacher more than a scientist.
Yes.
I enjoyed working with the students. I taught my own labs, and I really got to know the students because I had one-on-one contact with them once a week, close contact in the lab.
Well, that's a very effective approach, and
Well, I thought the lab was part of the lectures.
yes.
And we began every lab with a lecture, a short lecture.
Now, you mentioned earlier you've always been interested in the athletic program here at SMU, and my recollection is that you served on the athletic committee for some considerable period of time.
Yes, I was on the athletic committee for 9 years.
What years were those?
1966 through 74. Dr. Mouzon, was chairman for about 30 years.
Yes, Edwin Mouzon. Yes.
And I was on the committee for a number of years, and he recommended me to President Tate. And I had great difficulty in accepting that assignment because it meant the end of my research. It involved so many hours. But my interest in athletics really started about 1948 or 49. I had Frank Payne in my class that summer, and he was a great quarterback and also an excellent student. And that really inspired me to be interested in the SMU athletic program. And every year I would have several athletes taking organic chemistry and going to medical school. And some going to graduate school.
Frank Payne did too.
Frank went to medical
Yes,
school and went to Southwestern, became a distinguished pediatrician. He's still active, but he's considering retiring. He was a great passer in the 48-49 period. And I often used to think that if Doak Walker hadn't been so great or had not been here, Frank might have been our star. And his father played here. Did you know that?
Yeah, I remember.
His father played here in I think in the 20s. So he was a second generation. His dad was also a medical doctor. And surprisingly, his father, even though he was a Texan, was a graduate of the University of Tennessee, where I began my teaching career, the medical school in Memphis.
That's interesting, yeah.
I got to know his father pretty well on visits to Dallas, and that's how I discovered he was a graduate there.
Well, during your tenure on the athletic committee, you say 66 to 74.
Yes.
Do you recall any particular incidents or problems that came up? They're numerous in the history of athletics in every university, and we've had some interesting times here.
Well, we had a few discussions with the NCAA during my tenure, but we never received any severe penalties during those days. But occasionally we had an error in judgment by a coach or an alumnus, but nothing like the death penalty that occurred
It's generally,
87 or
a
8.
decade later, yes.
Yes. I think we had a good conference. We were part of the Southwest Conference.
Right.
And we worked well together. I'd say I can only remember one coach during my tenure that was penalized, but he was not terminated. It wasn't that serious. And I'd say it was pretty smooth in those years. I was very fortunate.
You were
I think.
fortunate in that respect. Yes,
Yes, I was.
Yes.
And these were the Hayden Fry years
Yes.
and the Dave Smith years.
Yeah.
And we did have some problems during Dave's tenure. But I don't remember any serious problem during Hayden's tenure.
Now, you've maintained your interest in the athletic program, and I understand you're now a volunteer in the athletic department.
I got involved in that shortly after my wife's death in 1991. Steve Walensky, who was at that time the director of the Mustang Club, had asked me if I would be interested in my spare time, which I had in excess, of trying to identify 8x10 photos of athletes that had no names on them.
Oh.
Hundreds of athletes were discovered, photos were discovered in one of the storerooms. So I would go down and work on them 3 or 4 hours, do what I could, try to recognize some that, and I was able to maybe identify 25 to 30%. But they all had uniforms on, and I formed them out to athletes that I knew in the different sports, and they helped me identify them. So we got quite a few identified. And then one project led to another, and I started keeping regular hours. I spend my mornings down there 5 days a week.
5 days a week.
It's fun.
And you've been doing that since 91?
Yes, April 91.
April 91.
I look forward to going down. I see so many ex-students, and I sort of serve as a link with the past, because many of the boys that come back don't know any of the present staff. And that's a big plus for me. Because, see, I knew Forrest Gregg real well when he came back
Yes, yes.
to be our coach.
Now, your work now is primarily in the information
Yeah,
area?
sports information.
Sports
I'm
information.
in the telephones. The phones ring a lot, and we get so many trivial questions.
Yeah.
Mothers will call in and want to know if we have a game 2 years from now on what days and Saturday we have an open date. We want to schedule our daughter's wedding.
Oh, yeah.
That's the kind of, and they call in and want to know the score of the Rose Bowl game in 1935. Well, I can settle those issues. They ask about the Notre Dame game in '49, and the great basketball team that went to the Final Four in '56. And I keep on my desk what we call media guides that have histories of all of our sports. So it's very useful, and I can keep the paid staff from wasting time.
Yes.
I have 3 lines coming in, and it keeps me going. But it's also fun, and I think it's good for me. I like to reminisce about the good old days, the glory days. I thought I was lucky to be here during the Doak Walker years.
Yes, yes.
I got to know Doak and Kyle Rote real well.
These were quality fellows, weren't they?
Oh, they really were. They really were. And great athletes.
Oh, indeed, yeah.
Yeah, Doak's death was a terrible tragedy.
It really was. It really was. Well, you've seen lots of changes in the athletic structure and the athletic department over these years. You care to comment on some of that? How is it different now from what it? How is it different from what it used to be?
Tremendous increase in the size of staff. and in a number of sports. We have 16 sports now. And part of this was due to the fact that, according to federal legislation, we had to have equal opportunities for women. We call it Title IX.
Title IX, yeah.
And in my early years on the athletic committee, we didn't have any female sports at the intercollegiate level. We had club sports, but not intercollegiate sports. I think tennis was the first sport. And now we have to have equal opportunity. So we have 8 women's sports and 8 men's sports. I think that was the biggest change than the increase in coaching staff, size of the administration. In my early years here, Ray Morrison and Mattie Bell had one secretary. Lester Jordan, who was our business manager, sports information director, assistant athletic director. He just about did everything. As a matter of fact, when I became chairman of the athletic committee, I would meet with him on Wednesday morning at 7. We'd spend an hour where he would instruct me on some of the policies and procedures. And we had one ticket manager for all sports. So it was on a much smaller scale. And yet those were some of the best years in the history of the intercollegiate athletics.
Where do you think it's going?
Sir?
Where do you think it's going? I sometimes am a little disturbed.
Well, I'm very worried about the future of intercollegiate athletics because almost all the major universities are operating on a deficit. Even places like Michigan have a sellout at every football game, 105,000. They still have a deficit.
Yeah. The more you have, the more you spend. Partly.
Yes, and also, so many of the sports are non-revenue sports. See, we have a great swimming program, but they don't generate any income.
No.
The women's program doesn't generate any significant income, and the number of coaches has increased. We have 4 coaches in basketball and 13 scholarships players. I never had that kind of teaching assignment. That's tutorial.
That's right.
And we have 4 coaches in track. So we have women's track, we have men's track. So and it's just increased every few years. Football has 10 coaches plus a head coach. See, I think when we went to the Rose Bowl, we had maybe 2 or 3 coaches. And when Doc Hayes was here in those great years in basketball, he helped coach football. Ray Morrison, in his early years, taught Latin and mathematics. So no coach teaches anymore.
Well, that's an unheard of versatility these days, I would think.
Oh, yes. That's true.
Yeah.
But,
well, there certainly are challenges facing us, and I share your concern about the future of college athletics. Do you feel that there are more, at SMU now, there are more genuine scholar athletes than we used to have? That's been the goal, I know. Are we succeeding in that?
well, I think our admission requirements are higher than anyone else except Rice in the Southwest Conference. See, we don't accept the NCAA minimal requirements.
Right.
They have to exceed those. And as a result, we graduate a large number of our athletes.
I'm very proud of that myself.
And
yes.
I could name, 100, maybe 200 athletes who have gone on to medical school, dental school, law school, graduate school. A large number continue their education beyond a bachelor's degree.
Yeah. And that's what we're all about.
That's right.
What we're all about, yeah.
I believe in the concept of student athlete. And I have the feeling that the number of student athletes who might be decreasing now because of the intense competition to win and to recruit, to be competitive.
That's the threat, isn't it? If you're not winning,
Yes.
then there's a tendency to kind of bend the rules a little bit, or your standards at any rate.
Yes, see, we rank in graduation rates with Stanford and Duke, maybe some of the Ivy League schools. So we're proud of that.
Yes.
Swimmers have the highest academic averages every year, both boys and girls. And see, we've had Olympic swimmers,
Yes, I know we have, yeah.
gold medalists. I think we had more swimmers go to medical school and dental school than any other sport.
Is that,
We also had quite a few athletes major in engineering. Our coaches, for the most part, permitted them to take labs. In our department, we had a night lab which helped with the practice.
yeah.
And we opened that night lab to any student who wanted it, and not just the athletes.
Yes.
But that was a way of helping the program. Now, another big cost factor in the athletic program is the learning enhancement program, which here at SMU is open to all students. We have a great reading program, speed and comprehension reading. We have a great tutorial program that doesn't cost any student. They can get
And all are equally
tutorial help.
eligible for it.
Yeah, and we have we must have 10 people on the staff, full time in the learning enhancement program,
Yeah.
headed up by Vicki Hill. Do you know Vicki?
I don't know her, no.
She was in the English department, has a PhD from one of the California universities in English,
Yeah.
but she runs the program. And the pre-meds frequently took the speed and comprehensive reading program because of the tremendous volume that they have to cover.
Yeah.
And it also helped them perform on the medical college admissions test,
Sure.
get that exposure. They even teach note-taking, quizmanship. And see, that's a program we didn't have years ago.
Yeah. But I'm glad to know it's available to all the students. That's
And I
that's
attribute
fine.
that to President Pai, who was a great supporter of athletics, but he wanted them to be students first.
Yeah. Now, when you retired from SMU, you moved out to Southwestern Medical School for a while.
I,
didn't
I
you?
was I was off a month, and they called me. Ron Estabrook, the head of the biochemistry department, phoned me one day, heard I was retiring, and asked me if I'd be interested in joining his department at University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. And I said, well, Ron, I'd like to think about it. That was in December. I retired in December 1979. I stayed on a few extra semesters, and I said, I'd like to take January off. And I want to do a little traveling and think about it. And when I came back from the trips, mainly fishing, I went out to see him. I knew him quite well through the American Chemical Society meetings, which
Yeah.
we meet once a month. And I finally negotiated a part-time appointment with him because I wanted to spend more time with my wife. I spent my mornings out there for 8 years,
8 years.
helping the freshmen.
Yeah.
The biochemistry course was considered one of the more rigorous courses. So Ron asked me to come out and help the freshmen. I gave a few lectures, but I did arrange tutors for them if they were having difficulty. And I also, during that period, sat in on every lecture given by the faculty and served as a critic.
Oh,
See, the course was taught by maybe 18 or 19 faculty members, each one teaching his specialty, and the students were unhappy with the course because of the lack of continuity, and the professors were so research-oriented that frequently they concentrated on the research and not on their lectures.
that's a fairly familiar story, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, it is, in a research university.
Right.
And I think that's happening at SMU now.
Yeah.
I see it happening in my old department. I see it happening all the time. See, in all my years in chemistry, the professors taught the labs. Ogden Bain was a great teacher, and he taught a freshman lab. And we did that for many years. Now, we couldn't teach all the freshman labs. We had to have some master's candidates to teach those labs, too, because we had so many. But the teaching part was really emphasized in those early years.
So you served to critique the lectures that were given by the
Yeah, right.
medical school faculty.
Yes, sir. And they knew I was in there, see. I was also in there with the course director. They had a course director that I knew quite well. His name was Joe Laspoluto. And he and I would talk after the lecture about what we thought were strong points, weak points, where we needed maybe less or more emphasis. And I think the fact that we were in the lecture hall with 200 students caused them to be better prepared.
Kept them a little on their toes, yeah.
But it was a great experience to be out there, and it was such an exciting place.
Well,
And
that's
we
an
had-
institution that the city can really be proud of, isn't it? They've really
Certainly
come along
can.
great.
I would say that the medical school here in Dallas, which is now part of the University of Texas, one of 4 University of Texas medical centers, would rank in the top 10 in America.
Yeah.
I can remember when it started. It started in 1943, so I got here, beginning of 1945. And it was in pre-World War II prefabricated shacks as a private school. It started here because the Baylor Medical College, which was here, was invited to move to Houston. But some of the faculty at that medical school did not wish to move to Houston, so they started their own medical school. And I think I became close to the medical school because 2 of my colleagues from the University of Tennessee were here before I was, 2 of my close friends.
Yeah.
One became the dean during the years when the school was struggling, Dr. Jim Gill. So I had a natural relationship with Southwestern Medical School from my earliest days here. It became a state school, I guess, about 1953, 4. And I think the greatest thing that happened was finding Charlie Sprague, one of our distinguished alums, to be the dean.
Yeah.
He came here from Tulane.
He's made a marvelous contribution, hasn't he?
He certainly has. I certainly give him credit for the reputation, the strength of the faculty. He and Dr. Don Selden. Selden was more of the academic leader. Dr. Sprague was the administrative head, and I would say the financial leader.
Yes.
Charlie Sprague was a hero in Dallas. He played football at SMU, track, basketball. His father was mayor.
Yes.
He had 3 distinguished brothers, all of whom were athletes. And I would really like to know who recognized the impact he would have on this small medical school. When he came, they had about 100 faculty, full-time faculty. I think now they're up around 1,000.
Is that so?
I go out there about every 2 or 3 weeks for lunch just to visit.
You know, I remember Charlie Sprague from his high school days. I was just a boy at the time.
Sure.
But he played football at Adamson, the old Adamson High School. And I went to one of their games. I guess it was against Woodrow Wilson, which was my high school. He had broken his arm, and he was playing with the cast.
Is that right?
And he made an outstanding catch right in front of where I was in the seats. Well, I had previously had a broken arm, and I was just absolutely flabbergasted that a person could play with a broken arm. I reminded him of that later on, and he'd almost forgotten about the whole incident, but that made a real impression on me. And of course, that kind of perseverance has characterized his whole career.
His whole career.
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize it, but he was a distinguished hematologist before he became an administrator.
I didn't know what his field was.
See, his field was hematology. He had postgraduate fellowships at Washington University in St. Louis, and also at Cambridge or Oxford, I can't remember, before he joined the Tulane faculty. He's a graduate of the University of Texas Medical School at Galveston. But he made his reputation, I think, as a medical statesman at Tulane. Then he came here as a dean first and then president.
Yeah.
And he's president emeritus now.
Yes.
He's going to be our speaker Monday night. I can
Right
hardly
at the
wait.
Town and Gown Club.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to it also, yes.
It's going to be interesting.
Now, we've had a lot of SMU students go to the medical school there, haven't we?
At Southwestern?
At Southwestern.
Yes. Several years ago, I read the directory, and I counted 348 that I could remember.
Is that so?
Have medical degrees from Southwestern.
That's remarkable.
That would include people back to my years, January 1, 45.
Yeah. Well, it must be very very thrilling to you to know that you had a hand in helping them along. Yeah.
Just that many at Southwestern.
Yeah.
And every year we sent someone to Washington University in St. Louis, which was a great research medical school, also to Harvard. Not every year to Harvard. One year we got 2 boys into Hopkins, which was we thought was quite an achievement.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we had 27 on the faculty out there at one time from SMU. Full time.
Is that so?
Yes, some are still out there. They haven't retired yet.
Now, some of those will be part-time faculty, I
No,
guess.
no, they're
They're full-time?
Yes. See, that's what makes that medical school great.
Yeah.
They don't use the clinicians as part-time like they did in the early years.
Yeah.
The people out there are now they use some in the hospitals,
Sure.
but they're full-time. When I said they have 1,000, these are full-time
Is that so?
faculty. Yes.
Well, that's interesting to know.
And I think it's partly because of the research emphasis. They have 4 Nobel laureates.
Yeah.
Did you know that SMU had a medical school for about a year? And
I didn't know that, no. When was this?
about 1915 and 16 when they opened up. It was operated jointly with Southwestern down at Georgetown, I think.
Oh.
You remember Dr. Geiser?
Yes, oh yes.
Well, he wrote the history of medical education in Dallas, and that's how I learned about this. And he had good evidence for the short existence of our medical school. Well, I think most of the presidents were happy we didn't have one because of the tremendous cost.
Right.
The cost of medical education for a student is so high.
Yeah, yeah. We were under pressure for a time when I was in the provost office to open a nursing school, and we decided against that for the same reason.
Now, we used to teach the chemistry course for the Methodist Hospital Nursing School.
Did you?
They came out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We taught that for a number of years. A special course just designed for nurses.
For nurses, yeah.
Yeah. You remember Tom Kenner?
Yes.
He taught that course. Almost all of us in my earlier years here, I'd say 2/3 of my tenure here, taught a night school course to supplement our income because the salaries were low. But we also taught summer school. Now, today that's not as common. I think the salary scale is much better.
Yeah.
But SMU always had budget problems. Well, you know, because you were in the provost's office.
Well, and before that, I remember very, very vividly having to take on extra things in order to make economic ends meet, yeah.
I can remember when we couldn't purchase any chemicals after about the 1st of March, some years until a new group of students came in.
Yeah.
Well, with tuition.
Well, Harold, do you have any further observations you'd like to make about where the university is or where it's going?
Well, I'm really impressed with the new leadership. I think we have a president now who is an excellent administrator, but also a financial expert.
He relates well to the community, too, doesn't he?
He does.
Yes.
He works hard. He never turns down an opportunity to speak, and he's a good communicator, I think, excellent communicator. I think our leadership is excellent, and our capital fund drive, it just amazed me with the
Right.
success of it.
Never had anything comparable to
Yeah,
that in our
no.
history. And,
I was trying to think of sustentation used to, in the early years, they only raised about $700,000 a year, as I recall,
yeah.
under Bishop Bowes. You remember Bishop
he
Bowes?
started that, yes.
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 He was a strong supporter of athletics also.
Was he really?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I think that got us in trouble in the 1920s because he had the impression, I think it was he, I could be wrong, I did read Mary Martha Hosford's History of SMU, which documents those early years, that if we had a good football team, we could raise more money. And we got on probation because they bought some of the boys. That was in the early years, the Southwest Conference.
The temptations were early, and they've
20s,
continued.
20s. I think he left SMU when he became a bishop, didn't he?
Yes, yes, he did.
Have you read Mary Martha Hosford's book?
I haven't read it, no.
I
should do
wish
so.
I could find. I loaned mine to someone. I don't have it. It's out of print. It was her doctor's dissertation. See, she was Dr. Hosford's daughter.
Yes, yes,
Our first provost.
right.
That was an exciting time in my tenure here. When I came out from my interview, we didn't have a provost. We did have a dean, but he was kind of like the dean of instruction. It was Fred Smith.
Yes.
But there
yes.
was a committee of professors. I was interviewed by Elmer Cheatham, biology, Claude Nichols in education, and Dr. McIntosh in Latin.
Yes.
Of course, Ogden knew me, Dr. Bain knew me in chemistry, but also by Humphrey Lee. And one of the highlights of my interview trip was an hour with Dr. Lee. Because he was an inspiring man. Did you get to know him, Neil?
Yes, I did.
You
yes,
were,
I did.
of course,
know
in
him,
seminary also, probably.
Yes. But
Boy, that was a big event in my life.
he was president at that time.
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a remarkable man.
And it was he who assured me that we would get out of the basement of Atkins Hall. At that time, we were talking about an addition to Higher Hall, a 3-floor addition for chemistry. Because of the utilities, we had to have a concentrated area so the plumbing could take care of the corrosive chemicals. Well, on every Wednesday afternoon, starting in 1945, we met at 4 o'clock to talk about what we would like in a chemistry building. About 1947, while we're still planning an addition to Higher, Mrs. Fondren gave the university $1 million for a science building. And Dr. Lee decided that that would be the first post-war building, and it was. And it turned out to be, it was like a temple compared to the basement of Atkins Hall. It was dark, dreary. We had floods and heavy rain, and it was just a very unpleasant place. We got that building, and it was state of the art. First air-conditioned undergraduate chemistry, a science building, I think, in America, undergraduate.
Is that right?
Because of the terrific loss of cold air in the summer, you evacuate the air, it's lost. You don't recirculate chemistry air. That was a wonderful building.
And that was opened in what year?
In June of 1950, we moved in.
1950.
That was one of the most exciting days in my life.
I'll
because
bet.
It was, I can remember the dedication when Mrs. Fondren was in the lobby of Fondren Science. and how proud she was to give the building to Bishop Smith. And she ended her remarks with the statement, "I have only one regret today. Walter is not here." Her husband, he had
yeah,
passed away.
yeah. Mhm.
I got to know Miss Fondren. I was lucky. I didn't know her well, but she was so proud of the building. You know.
Yes.
I was her guest with Willis Tate in the 1968 Bluebonnet Bowl football game down in Houston, and when we defeated Oklahoma 28-27, when they had a great
was
team.
there. I
Were you
was
down
there,
there?
yes.
I was up in her box. See, I was chairing the athletic committee in those years.
Yes.
And Willis and Joel and Margaret and myself, we were up there with her. Had a butler serving us. It was a great evening.
Well, that was a great victory also.
Oh, yeah, it was an upset.
Yes.
That's where in the year that Rufus Cormier, the great black student athlete,
Right.
was voted the outstanding player. He was our nose guard.
Yes.
Did you know about Rufus's great history?
Subsequently, you mean,
Yes.
Going to law school?
Yeah.
Yes. Mhm. Is he in Houston now? Is
Yeah,
that-
so I can tell you a little more about
Yes,
him.
please do.
When I got to know Rufus pretty well because I tried to get him to go to medical school,
Oh.
but he really wasn't interested in the sciences. His girlfriend, Yvonne Clement,
Yes,
when he
I knew her.
married,
I knew her very well. Mhm.
was a biology major. So because of that, I got to know him. See.
Yeah.
Anyhow, when he graduated, he had a 3.47 average. He just missed Phi Beta Kappa.
Mm-hmm.
He had scholarship offers from SMU Law School, Texas, and Yale. And he chose
Went to
Yale
Yale,
wisely.
yes, yes.
Wisely. Today, he's a distinguished lawyer in Houston. His wife, Yvonne, has an MD and a PhD, both. They're just a wonderful couple. They have two
Yeah.
little boys. Well, they're not little anymore. A couple of Mercedes, I think.
Well, I was privileged to know both of them when they were students.
Oh, you
here.
knew Yvonne, too?
Yeah,
You know,
yes,
she
I knew
was
her, yes.
voted into mortar board.
Yes, yes. I remember in that Bluebonnet Bowl game that you were mentioning, OU had a back. I don't remember.
Steve O'Neill.
Steve O'Neill. he had never been stopped for a loss in the entire year, and Rufus
Rufus.
stopped him 3 times. I
Oh,
think.
yeah. I can't remember. Did Ken Fleming catch that pass in the end zone as the clock ran out?
I can't remember
can't
that detail.
remember
No,
either.
no, but
Yeah,
it was.
I know it was 68. It was 28-27.
It was a
It
very, very close game, and
Yeah.
we were. It was a great victory
was
for
in
us.
the Astrodome too. That was
Astrodome,
exciting to
right.
be in there, you know.
Yeah.
And Oklahoma was ranked, I think, at the time.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. Well up there. Mhm. Yes.
I've seen Rufus and Yvonne over the years when they come to Dallas.
Yes. Well, that's an inspiring story, isn't it?
Oh, yes, to have a student leader like Rufus. And see, he was from the same high school, I think, that Jerry Levias was from. I'm not sure of this,
Was he?
but they were good friends,
Yeah.
you know.
And
See,
Jerry was our
preceded
first
him.
black athlete. And
See, Jerry was our first black athlete, scholarship athlete in
Scholarship.
the Southwest Conference.
Yeah. Right.
And he was a great athlete.
Another quality fellow, too.
Oh, yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
Jerry is in Houston. I see him occasionally.
Well, I think the continuing contact you have with former students is really,
That's kind of a hobby with me.
but it's a remarkable testimony to your effectiveness as a teacher and your caring about students. That's
Oh, thank you.
that's it. Yeah.
No, I do keep in touch with a large number, and I start writing the Christmas notes in November. But it's great to receive them
Yeah.
also.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. Well, is there anything else, Harold, that you would like to expound on?
I don't know if you know the story of the Dr. Pepper gift to SMU.
I don't know that.
One day, President Tate called me on the phone and said, "Could you write a one-page proposal that I could present to Mrs. O'Hara, the widow of the former president, the man who made Dr. Pepper a great company, who was deceased.
Mm-hmm.
He referred to her as Pep. I never called her Pep. Pep O'Hara. And Paul Hardin was the president. Willis was a chancellor. And I wrote a very brief couple of paragraphs in the form of a proposal, what we would do if we had $1 million or more. And I stressed teaching. And I had one meeting with her and Willis and Paul. We had lunch together at the Student Center. And I think Willis and Paul asked me the right questions.
That they could
Because
ask.
shortly thereafter, she gave us $250,000 worth of Dr. Pepper stock, chemistry department.
Oh,
Chemistry department, not the university. The chemistry department. Yeah, okay. In her own handwriting, she sent me a note and a personal check for $10,000 and said, "This is for a few test tubes." That was her humor. 10,000. See, our budget wasn't even that, for equipment. Well, I kept in touch with her and told her what we were doing with the money. I never saw her again. And I was so glad I went to her funeral, because that great lady who gave her fortune away in her will was not remembered by many people, considering what she did. But in her will, we got $2.25 million
really?
stock. I don't think that's well known,
It's
except
not well
to
known,
people
no.
like Paul and Willis
Yeah.
and the chemistry department. See, we have an endowment there. And we named a professorship after her father, Robert Sherman Lazenby. Have you ever seen that in print? Robert Sherman
I don't think
Lazenby.
so.
Mrs. O'Hara's father called himself a beverage chemist,
Yeah.
and he had a bottling plant in Waco.
Waco, yes.
That's where it started. And let's see, Willis called her Pep because of Dr. Pepper. And I never, of course, he was deceased when she had this interest in giving some money to to science. And Willis, I guess, selected chemistry, because I think we had a pretty good department in terms of the quality of our graduates.
Right, right.
Well, we averaged about, in most of my years, 20 to 30 majors a year graduating.
Mm-hmm.
And so many went to medical school or graduate school. During my tenure, over 125 received PhDs in chemistry.
Is that so?
And we didn't send them to minor institutions. We sent them to places like Harvard and Yale and Illinois, the great chemistry schools of America. But that gift from Mrs. O'Hara, see, we have the Lazenby scholarships, we call them now. Give more scholarship help for our majors. And we also were able to use, it's an endowment, as I recall. We could not use the capital.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it grew, the stock
Sure,
was,
of course,
I
yes.
can't remember. Well, this was probably about 1973. Paul was here, I think, in 73,
Yes.
74.
He came in 72
Were you the provost under him?
for a few months.
Just a few months.
I concluded my term at the end of 72, and he had come, I guess, in the summer or fall of 72. I stayed on to help
Do you know
him
about
get
his
started.
great success?
Oh, yes.
I can tell you so much. I've kept up with him.
Yeah.
I've seen him a number of times because my children went to the university. My grandchildren went to the University of North Carolina.
Yeah.
And every time I went out there for one's graduation, I saw Pa.
Yeah. He went from here to Drew University
Yeah,
and
that's
then
right.
became chancellor of the North Carolina system.
And
I
his
believe.
last year was the 200th anniversary of the University of North Carolina. And he led successfully a campaign for $425 million.
I
Made it. He built a house on the golf course. Did you know that?
I knew he was a great golfer.
Yeah. He was a Letterman golfer at Duke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he could have probably made a career in golf had he chosen to do so, but
or maybe even politics. You know, he ran for mayor once of some, I think,
Yeah.
was it Durham?
I think it was, yes,
Yeah.
I think it was, yes.
I also had the joy of going out there. I could see Stuart Henry, who was a close
Yes,
personal
oh
friend.
yes, he was here for many years.
Yes. See, Stuart came back every summer. He left here in 1959 because he couldn't resist the call to go back to his alma mater and
Yeah.
succeed his old professor. So
At Duke.
we lost him at Duke,
Yeah.
to Duke. But then he came back in the summer and taught the pastors who came back to
Right.
strengthen their theological background
That's right.
for 4 weeks.
Yes,
And that was wonderful for me because we were such close friends. He married my children,
oh really,
Richard and Judy.
Yeah.
We brought him back from Duke.
to do that, yeah.
He baptized my 3 granddaughters,
Yeah.
one in my mother's living room in St. Louis, because he happened to be there when the kids were there. Another one in the Duke Chapel.
Hmm.
We went out for that. The third one, I can't remember where that one was. But he baptized them and married my kids.
And he was another very effective teacher, very,
Yes, sir.
very,
I think that's
very
what-
eloquent man.
We both were interested in students.
Yeah,
And our friendship developed because I would listen to his marvelous lectures behind the big chemistry lecture hall. Remember that big amphitheater?
yes, yes.
Well, behind that, we had a sort of a small laboratory for preparing demonstrations. But every morning, the first one there made coffee. Well, Stuart was so popular as a teacher that he had his religion courses over there. And I would listen to him while I was drinking coffee.
Eavesdropping, or
Yeah, oh, it was spectacular.
yeah,
And he would have coffee with us after his lecture.
yeah.
It was a great experience to know him, and we became fast friends. I think basically we shared a love of students. We enjoyed helping them.
Well, ultimately, that's what
He
it's
liked
all
my
about.
He liked
That's
my
what-
wife's cooking too, and he was my wife's, or a close friend of my mother. Oh, he called her Miss Kate. You know, her
Oh.
name was Catherine, but
I
everybody
see.
called her Kate.
Yeah.
Miss Kate.
Well, those are wonderful stories. And,
Wow. Oh, I have many stories of this place, maybe too many.
if you have something more you want to throw in here, well, please feel free to do so.
Trying to think of some other big events in my life.
Well, we're pretty well running down in time, but I think what you've given us today is just a marvelous
Well,
recollection.
I'd like to
of,
conclude my part by saying that
Yes,
for me it was a real privilege to be a member of this faculty.
yeah,
And I accept these honors that the kids have given me with a feeling of great indebtedness to them, because
Yes.
they made it possible by their hard work and success and gifts.
Well, it works both ways, doesn't it? You contributed a lot to them, and I'm impressed by their expressions of gratitude to you.
They're so
and,
good to me, Neil.
and
I don't know how I've been so fortunate and then have a long life.
And you are now
87.
87 years
88
old.
coming up in August.
I see. Well, may it go on for a long, long
Oh,
while.
thank
And we
you.
thank you for being here today and for your contributions over the years to SMU and to the students.
Thank you very much.
We've been talking here with Dr. Harold Jeske, a retired faculty member, professor of chemistry at SMU. Thank you for watching.
Did we do enough?